Great. Okay, welcome to this Q&A session with April de Angelis as part of Durham Drama Festival. April is an acclaimed dramatist who has written for theatre, opera, radio and television over her career. Her work has been performed at the Royal Court Theatre, the Haymarket and the National Theatre, to name a few. Just before the outbreak of COVID-19, My Brilliant Friend, her adaptation of Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels, was being performed at the National Theatre, and it's a pleasure to have her with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
So I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and then we'll open up the floor later on. For those who don't know me, I'm Gabby. I'm president of DST. So to start with, how did you get into playwriting?
Well, I wanted to be an actress, and that I was obsessed with that as a child and like as a young person. And I was in, I was always in a youth theatre, and then when I went to university, I went to Sussex University and I joined the Drama Society. And when I was there, SUDS was the name of our Drama Society, Sussex, which I always thought was really funny. And they put out provocation like, well, you can write your own plays. Why don't we want people to write plays? And someone wrote a guy adapted a Ian McEwan short story, which is, in this short story, a man is obsessed with a mannequin, but for 1 minute of the short story, the mannequin suddenly comes to life and has a voice. So she speaks. So this was all sort of male interiority, and then suddenly this mannequin just woke up and spoke for a minute, and then she like died again. And then I was like, that's terrible. Why? That's a minute. It made me sort of politicized me, and I was like, how come she only got to speak for a minute? And like, I'm going to write a play, but in my play. And so it sort of just spurred me to then write a short play with 2 women and a guy, and the woman was the central character, and it was her we were exploring. And it's interesting because since then I've heard quite a lot of playwrights say, if you don't know what you want to write, then if you know what you want to write against, that will really help you. And I think that's what happened to me. I was like, hang on, And so that was so I wrote a play. It went to Edinburgh. It was really exciting, and I loved that. And then I carried on. I sort of became an actor, and I worked for an all-women's theatre company, and they commissioned me. I wrote, actually, first, before that, I entered a competition for young women writers that was at the Albany Empire, the second wave, and I was like, I can remember this is how old I am, it was the days before computers. And so I typed it on a typewriter, and it was so, by the end, it wasn't a very long play, it was like 25 minutes, but it was really this big because I had so much Tipex on this play, which was this, I don't know what Tipex is. Anyway, and that got put on, and that was also really, it's a wonderful thing because it suddenly makes something possible. You're in a real live London theatre, which is all in the Empire. You're seeing your work. It has a rehearsal. It has real actors who are paid, and it was really powerful and wonderful. And then I got commissioned from the company that I was an actor in. I joined the Resistors Theatre Company, and they were doing all-women shows about issues. This is the 80s, so it's like, it's the issue-based theatre, and it's about trying to put women center stage, put their lives center stage, and it's very political. So the first show that we did was about domestic violence, and it was quite sort of upfront, in your face, and we would be in youth. And they then commissioned me after I'd won this competition. They said they had some money for a commission. They said, all right, it's a play, and that's how I began. So I was really lucky, actually. Very lucky. But I also think it's I can remember sort of saying to my people I live with, I'm going to write a play, and them going, yeah, but what, everyone wants to write, but you have to sort of go, my advice would be like, really just do it and don't let anyone put you off.
So leading on from that, where do you think you get your ideas from?
Gosh, that is a really good question. And well, I think your ideas, I do think in some really profound way you're writing about your own experience. That's your deepest level, and it's what kind of, and on a quite psychic level, the kind of the experiences you've had, the relationships you've had, how you've negotiated them, so there's that sort of stuff happening. So, and then there's things like, you know, you thinking about, like we just talked about, you know, writing against another play, or thinking, well, thinking, well, how you might, what you might want to say, literally, well, I mean, asking yourself that question, like, what's important to me? What do I want to say? And then there's a research. I mean, I've just been researching. I've just read Owen Jones's book called The Establishment. So I often do this thing where I think, well, I was at a protest about the climate protest in the summer, and I happened to be I was in Tufton Street. I'd never heard of Tufton Street, but it's the place where all the right-wing think tanks are in London, in Britain. And I mean, I didn't really, I mean, it sounds crazy, but I didn't really know what a think tank particularly was, but it's the kind of beating heart of evil in our society. So they put out all the climate denial stuff. At the moment, they're doing stuff like trying to suggest that there's an education czar that makes sure that left-wing and right-wing ideas have equal balances within a university, so that right-wing academics aren't prejudiced, don't suffer prejudice in the workplace of an environment like a university. I mean, this is toxic. This is Nazi stuff. I mean, this stuff is being made up by these people. Sorry, I'm just blur. So that I mean, I don't know. But my problem is, of course, is that how do you make that into a play? I don't want to preach to people. So and plays should be imaginative, and they should be about the imagination. And I just read a really great line that said, political failure is a failure of our imaginations, you know. So I think that's what, in a way, I think writers have a sort of an artist to sort of take another thing I just read, you know, that artists take responsibility. Everything they write, they have to stand behind with all their soul, all their mind, all their heart. That this is what I think, and that's very good. That's one of the roles of an artist, but also that it should be an imaginative. It should be the imagination that's what you're giving to the world as well, saying let's think and feel this stuff. And so I don't know, and where do I get my ideas? So that's research, personal experience, thinking about other plays all the time. You're always in a conversation with what other people are writing. But also, I suppose, actually, does anyone been watching Grace and Perry's Art Club? Anyone watch that? I love it. And they said something really good yesterday. They said, when they were saying, you know, people saying, well, what advice would you give to people? Grayson was asking his wife, Philippa Perry, and she said, don't do what you think other people think of as art. Do what you think is art. And I think that's the same with writing. Don't think, well, I ought to write this. You know, really try to sort of find your own voice, I suppose. And that's the sort of, and there's something true about that, because then you're not writing a cliche. A cliche is what someone else has thought and what you think you should be thinking. But when you're writing, you know, sometimes it's the unbidden thought that you think, oh, actually, maybe they wouldn't do that, the thing that everyone thinks they would do. Maybe they would do this, and that's what they do. And the other thing, sorry, I'm talking too much on my own, it's lockdown. It's I was talking to Gabrielle Alex before about this book by George Sanders, who's a short story writer. And he said, it's a really good thing, advice. He teaches short stories, but he's thinking about story all the time. And he said, you know, as a writer, he said, he started out and he really wanted to be a particular kind of writer. He had it imagined in his head, the writers he admired. But he said that his writing was never alive when he tried to write like them. And then he was always getting these, you know, vague, this is quite good, but not quite good enough. And, you know, one day he was sitting weirdly, this is really interesting, doodling. And he started writing these funny little stories, like weirdy little things. He wasn't really even thinking. And then he was going to throw them away. Then he just put them in his bag, and then he just he dumped them on his desk at home. And then he heard his wife laughing, and he was like, why is she laughing? And she picked up his little stories, and she said it was the first time he'd ever heard anyone laugh. And then he thought, actually, maybe that's my real voice. It's not the voice that I wanted to be. And I felt like that because I'm not particularly avant-garde or a particularly formally experimental writer. I'm quite conventional in a way, and I like characters, and I'm always saying to myself, God, why can't you be more like sort of Sarah Kane, who's the most wonderful. But the thing is, you have to be who you are. I think that's the other thing, not to be afraid of who you are, because that's where the vitality of your writing comes. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
That's great. So what would you say your writing process is like on a project, and how do you sort of reconcile that research you do with still incorporating imagination?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think that's a real task, and people, I mean, I can think once, like I remember I'd had given a project, this is about 20 years ago, by the RSC. They gave me all this testimony that had been gathered by people that lived in Warwickshire between the wars, so between 1918 and 1945. And they'd gone round with research. They got, and they gave me this massive chunk of research, and they said, like, can you make a play out of it? And I was like, yeah, it'd be great. And so I read the research and I loved it. And but I couldn't for the life of me think of how to make it into a play that had a kind of unity about it, like what's at the heart of it, like you have a central idea that in a sense is pulls all the threads together, makes the metaphor, you can keep coming back to sort of going, oh, I know why this is happening, because it relates to this central I just couldn't do it. And so I just put all this stuff in a bag under my desk, and I just thought, I'm just going to have to tell them I can't do it. But I was really scared to do that. And then like one day I thought, okay, now I have to tell them. So I opened like my laptop. I did have a computer by then. And I started going, dear, RSC, like, I'm really sorry. I've read all the stuff and there's no way I can do this unless. And then I was thinking, unless, what do you mean? And I thought, oh yeah, unless you did this. And I was like, oh my God, that's how you do it. So like, I'm bidden. That there is something very mysterious about, there's sort of sides of your brain. There's the brain side that can collate all the information, that can, write an essay on the subject that's all kind of, and then there's the sort of, and then there's just the crazy side of your brain that's kind of like, yeah, but you could do it like this. And it's like the more lateral, imaginative. And sometimes they just won't come together. For me, it takes 2 years for them to sort of, I know it sounds weird. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but there's something that happens, that information stops being something you've just sort of hoovered up, and then you've really breathed it, you've lived it, you've slept with it for 2 years, whatever. And it must make all these connections in your brain, and suddenly there's an imaginative way to do things. Well, that's one thing that, I do think that the process is really, it's a really puzzling process. And, there's just, every time I sit down to try and do something, I always feel like I'm just starting again. Like, what's going to happen? Is this idea going to be good? Is it going to work? Are those two parts of my brain going to come together, or are they just not going to come together? Or but there's no getting away from the fact that you have to just try and be thinking about it, and then taking breaks from it. And I do think it's a very good sign if, when you're writing, you can think of a scene or even a character or an image. If something starts to come alive theatrically for you when you're on a subject, that's like a good thing to happen. And you have to just look out for those. And I'm always thinking about other reading. I was reading John le Carré about him recently, and he wrote, he's the spy novelist that just died. So he has these incredibly plotty books that everything's like these incredible, the way things fit together. You feel like someone has to be a mathematician, and he's sat down and he's done this huge chart and he's written it. And he says, no, I just start with the first word and I just see what comes out. And I was like, that's so weird. But do you see what I mean? So somewhere it's not as easy as just plotting something out. I don't know. Is that answered your question, or have I just like made it really even worse?
No, it does. I'm going to slightly lead on from it now, though. In terms of, your plays often feature historical figures. Do you feel, when you're researching that at all, there's any ethics of writing about historical figures that you have to sort of adhere to?
To be honest with you, no, because I think you can do anything you like. So because I mean, I can think of people like Howard Barker, who wrote about Queen Victoria, and like he wrote her as a sort of, I can't remember how he wrote, but she's sort of this monstrous, she's like Alice in Wonderland or something, but I've been kind of a monstrous one. I mean, he just decides that he wants to use the way a writer should be free to use history, but he's not trying to write a historical, accurate play. I mean, Richard III is Shakespeare's, that's not really the story of Richard III. That's a kind of Tudor mythology, plus the fact he wanted to write about ambition and kingship and evil, and he just decides, but and he used, do you know what I mean? I mean, so I would go like, don't be afraid of doing it. I mean, do what you like with it. So that, but I suppose, I mean, but I suppose it's also like your choice. Like I've written, you know, Playhouse Creatures, this first play about the women, the first actresses. Well, nobody really knew much about them anyway, because nothing was really written down. So you have these clues, and what was my intention? My intention was for this company to try and sort of say, well, look, there was a moment when women weren't allowed on the stage, and then the moment when they were, and what was that like? And you just have to make it up, sort of thing. And actually, that's very liberating. I think if you try to, lives don't, has anyone seen The Dig, that film that's just on Netflix, that's just come out? It's about the Sutton Hoo burial. I was thinking about this the other day, because it's a true story and the novelist, it's based on a novel, but the guy had to take fictional license because the story, life doesn't fit into a play. They're just, a fiction is an artificial structure, and life is just different, you know. So you're always going to be taking liberties, but take as many as you like. That's my, yeah.
Do you have a favourite play you've written or worked on, or is that too tough a
No,
question?
I mean, my favourite play is probably Jumpy, because it's the one that's done the best. So that's probably my favourite play. And it was really easy to write. For some reason, it just came out like whole, sort of thing. And I mean, you learn, you know, one's learning about play when you write. I mean, I've written plays that haven't been very good and shouldn't have gone on, but I didn't leave them long enough, or I mean, things. It's very interesting because of lockdown, because I had a play that was supposed to be going on in November, and it's being postponed, I think, till this September, I don't know. But within that, now I've really rewritten it, and it's much better than if it had gone on in November. And I'm like, thank God it didn't go on in November. Do you know what I mean? So that's, sometimes it's, Jumpy. But I've also got lots of play. I'm just reading Top Girls again at the moment, because it's my favorite play, I think, one of my favorite plays. So I often read plays as inspiration as well for other plays. It's quite a good thing to do.
Yes. And what advice would you have for any young writers?
Okay. Okay, really take yourself seriously. That's what my advice. I mean, I really take yourself seriously. Just think like, okay, I really have a passion. I really want to do this. I'm really curious about it. So I've got to really nurture it, and really, really believe it, because you may be unlucky and not immediately get people sort of, giving you the love and nurture you need. But you've got to so you've got to be quite strong, I think, and just think, okay, no, I believe I really want to do this, and I won't be put off, and which is different from not listening to people when they give you good advice or good criticism, because if you're lucky enough to get someone who can feed back on your play and help you, then that's brilliant, and you should listen to that. And so, I mean, one thing you can do, which is really easy, is to read a lot of plays. I mean, I know sometimes seeing plays isn't always possible, especially now, like, for example, but I mean, I would say that reading plays and reading books about plays, like playwriting books, there's some really good ones. I don't know if you've heard of one off the top of my head, it's David York's Into the Woods. He was it David Wood? No, David York's Into the Woods, I think it's called. And he ran the BBC Writers' Room. And it's just got some really, you know, it's just like there's a lot of shortcuts. I mean, instead of that you can take if you understand structure a little bit, and you know, there's a few things you can know that could just really help you. And it's and just, yeah, so I mean, really working hard at that, because I sometimes look back and think I didn't work hard enough. You know, I didn't read enough plays, I didn't think enough. I was, you know, I just like sitting down and writing stuff. And but actually it's like all arts is sort of it's a vocation, and you should take it really seriously and really work hard at it. I mean, also join writers groups so you can discuss each other's work. Reading other people's work is a really, and helping and being in a mood of being helpful, reading it and talking it through is also brilliant. And if you can find like-minded souls to do that with, that's good. The other thing is like being aware of the competitions that are going on, and trying to and not being afraid to, you know, when you've got a play you're writing as good as you can possibly get at, you know, sending it out to theatres and just trying to make any connections you can make. So that's good. But yeah, believing in yourself, and really believing yourself sufficiently that you really work hard at it. You read a play every week and you know what you like and you think about how it's structured. And I can remember the first Stephen Jeffries has just written a book. He was I knew him when I was starting out, and he would sometimes say things, well, this play has 16 scenes and 3 acts, and I was like, what? I'd never even thought about thinking about how many scenes are in a play, for example. It's really worth thinking about that sort of stuff.
What was the best money you ever spent as a writer?
The best money, gosh, I really don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I think it's, you know, go to the theatre a lot. I do go to the theatre a lot. I suppose I've spent quite a lot of money going to the theatre over the years, you know, and that's always really useful, because I think every time you go, you should try and think to yourself, well, how is that play working? What is it doing? Why did I like it? And also what's not working about it, and sort of try and make that part of your brain quite sort of active, so that you can without taking the fun. I mean, it should be fun to do that. Yeah, so going to the theatre a lot is how the best way to spend your money, I think. And buying playwriting books as well. I must have 20 playwriting books. That's a good thing to do. Yeah.
Amazing. You mentioned briefly before that you'd done some redrafting over lockdown. Have you found it easy to work over lockdown? Is there anything else you're working on, or has it been a bit difficult?
Well, no, actually, I mean, I think the thing about writers, what you need is your own room, like room of one's own. That's Virginia Woolf, isn't it? You need your room, and you need spare time, and I'm lucky enough, you know, that I had work, and I'm at a certain age and stage in my career that I had work, and I just could get on with it. And in fact, it's been quite good in a sort of horrible way, say in the horrible pandemic, which has been so destructive. But just thinking about work-wise, I've just been able to get on top of a lot of things, and I've been juggling quite a lot of projects. And I've been working with a woman, a composer in Australia that I've never met. She's a young woman who's just written this musical called Fangirls, and we're working on this a podcast musical together, sort of thing. And so every week we've been Skyping and Zooming and stuff like that. And that's also something that's really happened in lockdowns. I think someone got, you know, maybe it would have happened outside lockdown, but it suddenly seemed that we've got to work online anyway. We can work with somebody who's in Australia, so there's been some really interesting things. And also there were the little, I don't know if the unprecedented films, I don't know if anybody saw those, that Headlong did with is it BBC 4 or something, and I got to write one of those. I'd never really written I mean, I haven't written, I mean, apart from a long time ago, not really done any television, and so I got a chance to do some television, you know, so that was really amazing. So there's been some really interesting things. Yeah. Also, the whole COVID, I mean, although it's, the whole thing is, another thing for writers is, somebody asked me this, you know, how is it going to affect what you write, you know, because the world is going to be different after, when we go back, in some ways, you know, even in the sense that we've had to go through this hiatus, and, you know, politically, you know, you suddenly got a socialist government for briefly, which is sort of amazing. I mean, I know they're bastards, but they've had to spend money, you know, giving people vaccinations, for example. That is socialist, you know, you don't have to pay for them yourself. So it's quite interesting I mean, I wonder what it's going to be like when I mean, that's all writers, you know, have to think, like everybody, but especially writers, that they're supposed to be writing for people, you know, and trying to somehow take into account the experiences we've all had. Yeah.
I'm now going to open up the floor to questions. So if you have a question and would like to ask it aloud, then if you could use the raise your hand function or just wave at me, then I'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or on Zoom, and I can just read it aloud. So yeah, does anyone have an immediate question? Oh, Daisy?
Hi.
Hi, Daisy.
Hi, nice to speak to you. I won't say meet you, that'd be weird. You were saying about writing and making sure it's a really authentic voice and trying to make sure it's you. And I'm not going to ask you how to find oneself, because that's ridiculous. I mean, it's all kind of silly because, you know, we're all young people. Like, I'm 20, I don't know anything, but everything, trying to be most authentic to myself. I'm trying to write stuff at the minute, and it just almost feels like I'm being too vulnerable, that it's all a bit too authentic. And I'm thinking, God, I can never show this to anyone because I'll know exactly what it's about, and it would just be too embarrassing. So do you think there's value in that kind of vulnerability and it being a bit too real? Or do you think it might be better in a sort of more professional sense to try and push it through a metaphor or an allegory to have some sort of distance, to make it more or less about me? Kind of, in a way.
Yes, that's so interesting as a question. I mean, it's sort of slightly hard without reading it. I mean, I would say if it's telling a story, then that's the thing, and it has a structure, that it's not just an outpouring. I mean, that's fine, you know, to do an outpouring, because you don't always have to be, you know, you can then shape something or make it into something else when you find out what it is you want to talk about, or what it is you want to say. I mean, it's interesting, this thing about being too vulnerable, because it makes me think, like, sometimes people say to me, well, I've written this, but I can't show it to anybody because people will recognize themselves, or they'll recognize, but people, that's sort of that's often a defense. And it's often that people don't really recognize themselves, you know, they really don't. And it's because it's gone through the filter of your imagination. I mean, if you're writing and it feels raw and it feels vulnerable, but you feel it's telling a story and you feel like it's moving, you know, it would work in front of an audience because of this. There's a sort of direction that's being taken, and there's events that are happening, and it's had structure. Then I would say, well, there's just go, that's the thing you really, that's the real thing to kind of focus on, as opposed to is something to revealing, because I think all writing is going to be revealing. You can't get away from it, you know. But I mean, so I think it might be thinking along those lines, thinking about the story you're trying to tell. And sometimes it does help. I think when you were saying that thing about an allegory, sometimes it does help to, like, for the character not to have your name, for example. I mean, literally naming a character somebody else, and feeling free to invent around the core of something that you've experienced. But, you know, but for storytelling purposes, you may need, you know, you may need to change something, and you may have to make something up. You may have to make a whole other character up to come into that world to, you know, because, you know, drama moves forward through conflict, doesn't it? Conflicts, that's kind of obstacles, all these words that are really important. So but it just sounds it sounds like you've got it's very good to be able to, I mean, gosh, I mean, the first thing a writer has to do is to be able to put their emotion on a piece of paper in a way. So once you've made that connection and you know you can do it, that's very powerful, you know. You're not hiding. I mean, the point about writing is you want to make the audience feel something. I mean, and think something, of course, but also feel something. Because if our audience aren't going to feel something, then nothing's going to happen. So it's really interesting in a way that you feel that, you know, that it might be making them feel too much or something. Well, that's not that. I would say that's not really possible. You want to make them feel as much as you can. And I think feeling and thinking go together as well. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Anyone else have a question? Alex?
I don't know where my hands. They'll go in a sec. I have a slightly nasty question. It's not particularly easy to answer. I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't think anyone knows the answer, and that's simply enough, what makes a good play? Because I've been to the theatre a lot, and I come out, and if I go to see something with someone, they'll say, "Oh, that was terrible," and they say, "Oh, that was amazing," and we always end up going around in circles and circles and circles. I'd quite like to hear your as a professional playwright, because I think, you know, the answer to this question very much depends on one's experience and you know, the extent to which one has engaged in the theatre world.
I mean, it's a really good question, because I mean, obviously, you know, some plays, I mean, you think about Chekhov, his first play was like booed off the stage, and he said he just sort of thought after like a day, and he was like, I'm never writing a play again, you know. And he didn't write a play for 2 years because everyone hated his play because he was doing something really different. So there's always that, isn't there? It's like sometimes people find it really hard to recognize what they haven't seen before, because I remember that when Sarah Kane did Blasted, which I think is a play that makes you think, that makes you feel, that it's formally experimental and is also full of poetry, passion, and great, you know, moments of theatre sort of thing. It was just called Trash, and Michael Billington said it was just trash as well. I know he's our leading critic, and he then changed his mind, and she just went into hiding for about she had to go into hiding because there was so much hatred literally stoked up about someone who dared to, and because she was a woman as well, a young woman, it seemed like, how dare she basically treat a male. She said she sat in the audience and she suddenly thought, I've just written about a male journalist kind of getting his eyes, being raped and getting his eyes sucked out, and everyone here is a male journalist and they're going to be writing about my play. She was like, oh, maybe there's a mistake, you know. So that aside, but then I think you can look at really great plays that lasted. So why has Uncle Vanya, it's interesting, there's a production which you can see now on the telly, on Catch Up or something, that was a theatre production that then Sonia Friedman and Ian Rickson, they made I mean, it is a brilliant version of Uncle Vanya, brilliant performance. So you can just watch that play. And I watched that play and I just thought, I just thought that is my favorite play. I mean, I always do that. I think, no, this is my favorite play. I just thought, and so why is that such a fantastic play? What is it about the storytelling? What is it about this man? I mean, you know, a character has to be a character. I mean, not, you know, something must. If you're thinking about it in terms of, there has to be something universal about it. So something that happens in a specific, utterly specific world. It's not straining for the universal. The universal, you all go, I know what that means. I know about that feeling. And it's a play about waste and loneliness and in a sense, human spirit, even, and you know, connection with other people. And even in this, you know, the final scene is this, I don't know if you know, it all takes place in a big estate in Russia, like all Chekhov's plays, with these kind of lost souls, or trying kind of their lives kind of working, but not really. And then a series of events happened and their life works worse. I mean, that's sort of Chekhov in a sort of and where you find redemption. And so the last scene is just like two people. The whole world has shrunk to their little desk with a little candle, and and everything is so much more fragile than it was at the beginning. And you feel this guy Vanya is sort of going, he realizes he's given everything up for a false ideal. So he feels like he believed he was sacrificing everything for something that was worthwhile. And then at the end, he finds out that it was empty. It was an empty idol. And it's sort of devastating. He's sort of like 40, he's 45, he's, you know, all his love, you know, it's just, but it's also sort of the most wonderful hymn to a human being sort of thing. And it's a story, never, ever, every single moment works to tell you that story. As apparently, you know, as I think Chekhov apparently said, every event is a bucket of water that is being taken to the fire or something, which is such a great image. So everything is working to tell you the story, and it's working through pure kind of imagination, poetry. It's never giving you exposition, you know, information that isn't alive, because the characters would be thinking about it, saying it, speaking, and the world is so completely, you know, you feel like you believe in the world. I mean, that's kind of my idea of a good play. But I also really love Krapp's Last Tape, which is a brilliant Beckett stripped down world of just a man listening to tapes of when he was younger, going, what a bloody idiot, and then pressing the button again and going, oh, I was a fool. You know, this idea again of this very human thing of like, well, we invest, what is it that we believe in? What is it that we're giving our lives for? I mean, we have one life. What are we doing? You know, and it's like, how do I know I'm doing the right thing and I'm not betraying myself? I mean, these massive human questions, you know, that again, that are touched on through these real people and these stories. So the power of story, power of magic, I don't know. I mean, you know, Chekhov is full of these, Vanya again, you know, he tries to shoot someone and it doesn't work. He's like, I can't fucking shoot somebody. But it's really funny. Is it funny or is it sad? It's like, it makes you think, what is that funny emotion that's funny and sad? Yeah. But it's a really good question. And I think it's like, why ever put that question to bed? Why not keep that question alive all the time? Or what is it that makes something so good? You know, why are we still watching Othello without, I mean, Othello is another of the best plays ever written in the world. You know, that incredible play that still makes you go, no, don't, you know, it's still doing that still, and still making you think about, again, you know, what are we to believe? That's the other big question of all these, you know, theatre's totally about that, isn't it? What is appearance and what's truth? That's what the theatre's meant, is acting, people acting, and you know, it's a big question about it. I mean, yeah, I don't want to keep talking because I'm going on too much.
Natasha, did you have a question?
Yes, hello. I was wondering if you had any tips for how to approach when you have a first draft and you want to start refining it. Do you have like a certain way that you organize your time when editing? Because sometimes I feel like I'm just going round and round in circles and I'm not actually making any helpful changes.
Yes, I think it's really hard. I mean, one simple thing is like you really putting it aside for a while, like just leaving it aside for a week or 2 weeks. I mean, I have to do a rewrite in a play, and I just feel like it's almost like I'm sick of it. I can't take another bite, and so I'm like, I want to wait till I feel hungry for that play, and then I can go back and really. And then sometimes you just read something and you think, oh God, I get that now. I know, and things will appear to you. I mean, and it will suddenly, things will be clearer to you because you have a bit of distance and a bit of objectivity. Because when you're right inside a scene or right inside a play, you're really, you're trying to be with the people in the play, aren't you, and think what they think and what they might do. And it's like, then you come back and then you can have a sort of judgment on that. Is there something else? Often I think with plays, it's pushing it a bit further. Have I really put enough pressure on my central character? There's a thing called, that I literally found out the other day, called katabasis, which they talk about, which is a Greek term for taking someone to the darkest place you can possibly take them, and really making sure they go there, because that's the place where they have to die or be reborn, sort of thing. And that's someone in a play, has to be pushed, like Vanya gets absolutely pushed to go, oh my God, everything I've done was under an illusion, and a damaging illusion, and then he has to pick himself up and keep working afterwards, which is a huge act of heroism, But so there's that. So it's really, have you pushed your characters enough, and have you pushed your scenes enough? Because I don't know if when you think about a scene, if you think about reversals and discoveries, have you done all that sort of stuff? Do you know what I mean by discovery? Yeah. So, I mean, literally sometimes I've just gone through and think, is this really a scene? What's the discovery? What are the obstacles? What are the objectives? And so, I mean, it sounds a little bit sort of dry, that, but sometimes you can go, oh my God, yeah, like nothing really changes in this scene, or the obstacle's not strong enough, or I've made it happen too easily. Somebody might put up more of a fight. Maybe they wouldn't leave the room so easily. Maybe something else, just sort of like that sense of like really pushing at the dynamics. That's really good. Another piece of advice is sometimes you think about one thing. You don't try to rewrite everything. You go, okay, this character's really underwritten. I know that. So I'm just going to look at this one thing, do a draft just looking at that character, and then see what that unlocks, kind of thing. And then if you ever have, like, if you have a reading group, you have someone you really trust, or if you could even get a group of your friends to read the play, if you feel, and with a director, someone who has, and just to kind of, someone, to maybe sort of see if that unlocks something. I sometimes, like, actors are the most brilliant. Sometimes an actor, they'll go like, yeah, but I died on page 3, I'm coming back on page 5. You go, oh my God, or an actor will sometimes really have an insight and go, and sometimes they just unlock. I mean, a play is like a lot of unlocking, and it's like a lot of choices all the time. And sometimes you just go, if you sometimes think, oh, I haven't really thought enough about why they're doing that or what, and then you think about that moment and it unlocks something. So, I mean, another thing I'd say is don't worry, don't panic. Like, just, it might take you 6 months, do you know what I mean? But it doesn't matter, because you've done something brilliant, which is write a first draft, which is just absolutely amazing. So there's always, and there's all, the idea you can work on something is like, give yourself a lot of congratulations for doing that, because it's brilliant to have written a first draft, because it can only get better now. Reading those books, reading some playwriting books as well, reading about, that might help. I read, before I rewrote one of my plays, I reread a playwriting book and went, oh, of course, yes, little idea, little sentence might just ping something open for you. Good luck, Natasha.
So much.
That's all right.
Eric, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. I'm just going to put my video on because I don't want you
Eric,
talking
hi.
to hello.
Hi,
I wrote one of the plays, which is in DDF, and and I had a question about basically working with other people. I don't mean to sound incredibly like stubborn, but how do you compromise with your team of like directors and producers and actors? And it's not that like I can't take constructive feedback. It's just that when you've worked on something for so long and you know why certain parts are in where you've put them, and people kind of say, oh, I don't really get why this is here. How do you compromise your vision with what's genuinely going to come across to not only your team but also an audience?
It's a really good question. I mean, I I think that one thing, you shouldn't compromise your vision, because your vision is your vision, and that's what's made the play. But it might be that something that there may be, and it's quite likely that there might be something that somebody points out that says, well, look, have you considered this? And some writers go, no, this is the play, and that's fine. And there's nothing, there's no right or wrong about it, but it might just be that it's that thing of sometimes a fresh pair of eyes, or a direct, I've learned over the years that when people first gave me notes, I'd be like, oh my God, they just shut up. Do you know what I mean? I just didn't want to change anything. I was really like, it felt like homework, and I was like, no, I don't want. But then I would sit and watch my play in front of an audience, and I'd go, why are they shifting around? why aren't they getting what and then I'm thinking, oh, I see, because somebody said that before. That, oh, okay. Or, there are rules, there are storytelling, the storytelling is storytelling, and it's sort of, it has its own truths, and people like the show not tell thing that everybody knows. I mean, it's much more exciting to be shown something happening in front of you and go, oh my God, than someone tell you about it in reported speech. Sometimes you have to have reported speech, you have to have exposition, and that's fine. But there's a balance in a play. So if a play was all, there are moments when, so it could be that again, something, they have some good criticism, but you have to trust it as a writer. That's the point. And if you don't trust it as a writer, then you can't change it. So it does really end with you in a way, Eric. You would have to feel that it was good advice. And I think the thing is to really just to think. It doesn't ever hurt just to think about, and to, even if you don't act on it, it's quite interesting to note what people said. And sometimes people go, well, I don't really get this, and you think, well, why not? It's really clear. But then you realize that there is something there. It's not what they think, but there's something's not quite. I just think, and I think it's like experience. The more as you write your plays, and the more you go into rehearsals, and the more you see it in front of an audience, you'll begin to kind of go, okay, yeah, I should have stuck to my guns there, but maybe it was quite an interesting. Do you know what I mean? It's literally experience. But there are really good people out there, and they're full of love for you and your play, and they'll just want it to be good, and do you know what I mean? So my experience of working in theatre is that people are full of, they're not out to attack your play, they're out to sort of make it better, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but it's good when they're right, because it's great sometimes when you go, oh yeah, I am. But yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question at all.
It's actually been very useful, thank you.
Oh, phew, that's good. That's good.
I've had a question asked me on the chat asking, do you have any tips on getting your work past the 40-minute/1 act sort of timing, and prevent work from running out of steam?
That's another brilliant question, because I think it's about how much story you've got, isn't there? And I think it's quite useful to think about what a 3-act structure is. I mean, because 40 minutes is a one act play. And so it has one major climax in it. You're building towards this one kind of major turning point in the play that has an impact. And I'm talking about traditional sort of structures, so forgive me if I, sound a bit traditional, but that would be the kind of shape. You'd have an initiating incident, something would happen, throw the protagonist's life out of balance, and, they would struggle with obstacles to fight to kind of rewrite their life, and then they would make a discovery. There's this very interesting thing about what a character wants and what a character needs. So a character doesn't know what they need, they only know what they want. And at the crisis, that becomes clear. And in fact, that's part of what, so a character may be always working to get something that actually is the opposite of what they really need. And come the crisis, those things bang together, and you get this kind of explosion, crisis, and afterwards you get the kind of denouement, it's called, the kind of reckoning for that. But in a play, like in a 3-act play, I would just do a little bit of reading about, it may be that your play is naturally a 1-act play. And that's brilliant, because there's some brilliant 1-act plays, and all power to you for writing 1-act play, honestly. But then if you want to write a bigger, longer play, you just have to start looking at the structures of stories of bigger plays, and you have to think about what the 3-act structure is. So any of these playwriting books, like the David York one, or David Edgar's written a play about playwriting book. Stephen Jeffries has written a playwriting book. There's, or any, you know, look up the 3 acts or the 3-act structure, or just look it up, Google it or something. And this idea that there are 3 crises there's a crisis in each act, and each one is pushing the story of your protagonist in a classic structure to another crisis. So I'm going to try to, I mean, you know, look at Macbeth, you know, the first crisis, he has to kill the king, and he does, and they just about get away with it. The second time, you know, he's gone mad. He realizes he's going to have to kill more people because everyone's turning against him. So he has to, and then thirdly, you know, he's in a final fight with the forces have come back, and you know, there's these kind of, he's killed basically. So there's these 3, and he's just ahead on a and the cycles of that king corruption is sort of completed. So, but I mean, look, so try and think about 3-act structures and 3-act stories, and find your favorite long play and go, I'm going to make a map of this play. I mean, an interesting, you know, just so go, what's it, write a little précis of each scene, each act, and then look, okay, that's how it works. What, maybe I'll try and think of that's how technique and structure will, basically all I'm saying in a very long-winded way is structure and technique will really help you to develop your storytelling, you know, and a character that's big enough for a big story, you know. That's why Shakespeare, Hamlet, you know, that's got a big story in it, hasn't it? Saying the obvious.
Great. I think we have time for one last question, if anyone has one. Miriam?
Hiya. I was just really interested by what you were saying about thinking about what you want to say when you're writing and what's important to you, whilst also not being preachy. So I just wondered if you had any sort of practical writing tips on sort of sharing a message, but not overtly sharing a message, if that makes sense, and still letting other people have their own interpretations and think about it and be challenged by it themselves.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because maybe the word, I know exactly what you mean by the word message, but maybe the word is question, you know, what's the question you're asking? Maybe thinking like that is better. What's the you know, and also your protagonist is very interesting because your central character should be flawed. You know, your character, they're not a perfect receptacle for your voice and saying all the wonderful things we know should happen in the world. That's not what a protagonist is. A protagonist is someone who doesn't know what they need, who doesn't know what they want, or finds out what they want. And those things are different, that they have a moral and a psychological flaw. You know, they're not perfect. They are imperfect people, and they are encountering. So that's quite a useful way to think, that if your protagonist is not a saint, they're divided, they're in conflict, and maybe that conflict has got something to do with the issues that you're thinking about in the world, you know, you're trying to explore, that they're connected in some way to that. How much, you know, it's a big question, is it, how much responsibility should you know, is Vanya, for example, this person who doesn't know what he needs but knows what he wants, he has to support the professor, who's this big academic who owns the estate he's living on. He has to give everything, work so hard so that this professor can do all the thinking for him. And then he comes to this crunch point, he thinks, no, I should have been doing the thinking for myself. You know, it never really works when you give your power to Donald Trump, or you give your power to Boris Johnson, or you give your power to a climate denier. Well, it never works. You've got to think, you know, in a way. So you're saying this big thing, but you're saying it through this person who's struggling and human and flawed and divided, and is in situations, who doesn't know the whole play. They only know the moment, and that's a good acting, you know. And then when you're acting, they say you don't know the end of the play, you only know the moment you're in now. You know that you're only reacting to this dilemma now, in this you know, each scene has a choice for the protagonist. If you're writing in a really kind of, in a sense, what do they do, you know? How do they act against their own best interests is quite a good question, you know. So I think these are all storytelling. Again, I'd say it's like, in a way, they're all storytelling things, But you're absolutely right. Preaching is I mean, I've written quite preachy things in the past, and it's always like, wish I never did that. So it's a really good question, and it's a really good thing to look out for, and it's just one of those things you keep thinking about all the time. And yeah, so good luck, Miriam.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you so much, everyone, for all your questions, and an even bigger thank you to April.
Pleasure.
From all of us, there's been some really interesting discussions and a lot to think about in our many free hours of lockdown. So yes, thank you everyone for coming.
And happy writing, everybody. Keep writing.